I would like to call this meeting of the Kenmore Planning Commission to order. It is 6:30 on July 22nd. For those of you in the virtual audience, welcome to the special meeting. There is a quorum of planning commissioners here. They are just not on the dais, they are in the audience, and I will go join them there shortly. Welcome, everyone.
Okay, well, I guess I'll do the introductions. So good evening, everyone. To those in person and online, I'm Todd Hall. I'm the principal planner, and up with me is Debbie Bent, Community Development Director, and Tom Beckwith from Beckwith Consulting Group. And we also have several of our staff members helping out with support tonight. So this evening is a community meeting regarding the PROS plan. That stands for the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. And this is a plan that we need to update approximately every 6 years for to ensure that we're eligible for grant funding. And our expiration date is February of 2026. And so as part of the work, we update what's called the PROS plan, as well as the PROS element. That's the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space element of the comprehensive plan. And that part is essentially goals and policies, more directive on regarding long-term or long-range planning on parks and recreation. The PROS plan is the piece of the pie, if you will, that is really geared towards what are the desires, needs, and wants of the community. What are those facilities that we need to look at in terms of upgrades and maintenance, and then also how to fund for future projects looking longer term. And so tonight, Tom is here. He'll go through some of the pieces of that update and walk us through some of that. And then we'll also have an open Q&A session for anyone to ask questions, whether you're here in person or online tonight. So thank you for attending. So I'll turn it over to Tom and we can get started.
Let me ask you who you are and what your particular interest is. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay, great. Clear in the back. Okay. You, the glass, second person over here. Okay. Okay. In the dark shirt. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Okay, clear in the back in the pink. What's your name and what's your interest? Okay. Okay, and how many people we have online? They want to introduce themselves?
There are like 9 attendees online. Not sure how to ask them to, okay, I guess I'll have them talk.
They can chat.
If you're online right now and you would like to introduce yourself, you can put the information in the chat and I will relay it to Mr. Beckwith. I'll jump in if you want to go ahead and start.
Okay. Can you advance it to the first page? This is the overall contents of what the pros plan will be. You see there's introduction, there's goals, there's kind of the context of what the population growth and the characteristics of the town are. Community involvement, we've completed some workshops. The resident survey is still open. You can take it if you haven't taken it already. And then we get into citywide plan elements. We're looking at where the habitat areas are, the trails, where the parks should be, what kind of parks they are. Then we'll get into every single park that you have, what exists, what we think could or should be done with each of those, and see how they flow into the citywide plan. Then we'll be looking at implementation, and in the implementation will be some of the financial issues to be resolved with the next 6 and next 20 years. Now, before we get down into this area, there is one more survey. We will do that towards the end of the process, and what we'll be asking then is project priorities, and we'll be looking at financing for the different ways of financing and what does the public feel is the proper amounts and which funding sources to use. That survey will be accompanied by a postcard. It will go to every household in the city asking or inviting them to take the survey online. No, sure. Myself and my team are the consultants for the plan. I've been doing park and recreation plans for about 30 years, and I've done about 50 of them, and involving all different kinds of park issues, from waterfronts to trails to park master plans to financing strategies to impact fees. And on the team is an architect, landscape architect, art and cultural consultant, civil engineer, trails engineer, and a GIS specialist. And we've been doing this together for anywhere from 10 to 12 years. We were selected through a competitive process, and we are on contract to do this plan. Okay. All right. I'm sorry?
Oh.
We've been engaged since about what, January, February? And we expect to be done by the end of the year.
Hey, Tom, if I could just remind you, for the recording purposes, if there is a question from the audience, can you repeat it so it gets
Oh, sure. So it's
captured as
recorded.
part of the recording? Thank
Okay.
you.
This is our schedule. The boxes that are in green are the meetings we're having with the planning commission. The boxes in blue, which is tonight, is the open house. And there will probably be more of those scheduled as we get further along in the plan. And the boxes that are in red down in here is when we end up at city council. The boxes in orange, of course, are holidays, and we're not scheduling during those times. Next, please. One of the things we looked at is what are the characteristics of Kenmore, and we wanted to compare you with a number of other areas so that we had some kind of sense of perspective. So we compared some characteristics with the US, Washington State, Puget Sound. Puget Sound is the 4 counties of Kitsap, King, Snohomish, and Pierce, with King County, and then, of course, just with Kenmore. This is from the American Community Survey. It's a survey that the Census Bureau does every year, and they compile 5 years, and then they average those to come up with the characteristics. So you can see if we're looking at average household size, you're much bigger than any of the other comparable areas. And the percents in family, you're bigger than most of the areas. In median age, you're older than, say, the areas close to you, but not Washington State or necessarily the US. And the percent 65, you're about equal in all those areas. Next, please. For median family income, yours is the highest. And per capita, it's close to being high, but consider that you're being divided by more members in the family. Median house value, you're highest. Median rents, you're a little bit under King County and close to what the Puget Sound average is. Next, please. Language other than English, you're a little bit less than King County, but more than the others. Hispanic or Latino, you're actually lower. You're about similar to King County. Percent of population in poverty, you're the lowest. And total families in poverty, you're the lowest. But if we were to summarize you are suburban, older middle family with children, upper income, high value house and rental, but with housing stress costs, those are paying more than 30% for mortgage or rent, compared with King County, Puget Sound, Washington State in the US. You're more similar, but not quite the same as King County. You're a little bit more what we call urban. That's what you are right now, 2023. That's when the census statistics were collated. Next, please. Now, what's going to happen to you? These are the county projections, King County projections. And these projections are done about every 4 years, or they're also done when Growth Management Act needs to be updated by the Washington State Office of Financial Management, OFM. They do what's called cohort survival. They look at the death rates, the birth rates, and the net migration rates for every county in the state. And then they allocate based on those trends and based on what they think the Washington State's going to realize in total. Now, this is what the age distribution was in King County in 2010 and what they expect it to be in 2050. 2010 is blue, 2050 is red. Now, you can see that we've not done this on what's typically done, which is called a pyramid, where we compare male and female. We've done total ages, but were this an absolute triangle, you'd have the greatest births here and the greatest number of people there. And the impact of World War II and the deferred fertility rates, divorce, women working in the workforce, dissolution of families, not marrying necessarily and not having children, and a change in fertility and a desire to have children or not, is what's created kind of this trend. And part of that, as you can see, is what we call a bell curve. So there are fewer children here versus kind of what we call the middle-aged families. But you can see in the red what's going to happen over the next 25 years, the aging of the population. That's true nationally. In fact, that's true worldwide. And the issue is how it's concentrated within certain jurisdictions in certain areas. This is Kenmore's population projections, and it's done when Growth Management Act projects for every county. Then every county in turn has to allocate that growth back into the cities within the county. And they do that based on partly on trends, what each city has been attracting, but also on the capacity of different cities to be able to absorb growth. They do not project numbers anymore. They project the number of housing units and the number of jobs within each jurisdiction. But given your allocation of housing units, this is essentially what that would look like if we just carried it out over the next 25 years. And you can see it's not going to actually grow like this. There'll be peaks and valleys depending on what happens every year. But by 2050, you expect to have 33,000 versus you're about 25,000 now. So that's a significant increase in your population, but it'll be different. It's not going to be in the suburbs, it's going to be in your core. It's going to be in higher density housing units, potentially designed for different kinds of households that would be either older households or younger households, not necessarily middle family. So if we carry your projection out, you can see it's somewhat similar to King County, but you're going to have a much greater concentration of those above age 55. Now that makes a number of assumptions. One, that your relationship to King County will stay relatively the same, attracting generally about the same percentage age group that you have, but also presumes that a lot of people that live in Kenmore will want to stay here. And if they want to age here, then the question is going to be, what kind of housing are they going to live in? And if they're young adults, and there's still going to be young adults around, the question is, what kind of housing would they live in? So while you may increase in population, the characteristics of your development patterns and potentially the people that you attract or retain are going to change. And that affects your recreational needs and demands. Please. Now, one of the things that we use to determine what your future recreational needs or demands are is we look to the Washington State Recreation Conservation Office, called RCO. And RCO is kind of the master planner of all recreational activity in the state. And they're also the clearinghouse for all the grants and funds that flow through either the state or the federal levels to every city and every place within the state. Now, to keep current and to be eligible in turn for them to have federal money, they have to develop what's called a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, or SCORP. And in order to develop that plan, they need to know what kind of behaviors and activities people are doing within the state. So every 6 years, they do a survey, statewide survey, that's based on a diary kind of survey, asking people what they did, how many times they did it, where they did it within the state, or at least within what kind of park it would be, local or a state park or other. And then their characteristics by age, by income, by gender, by race. This last 2022 was the most current. It involved 6,000 people equally distributed throughout the state to gather those kinds of characteristics. And they divided them into 3 age groups, 18 to 40, 41 to 64, and 65 plus. And they presumed that while those were the adults completing the survey, that they indicated how many activities that the people within their household engaged in, regardless of their age. So even though they started at age 18, we do have some expectation that they have rates for those that are under 18. Now, this is just the participation rates. Participation means the percent of the population that engages in that activity. So you can see where they did it for 80 different activities. And I think the very top, you can see scooter riding. At the very bottom, you see walking on a sidewalk or road. And if you look at what Seattle King County's rates were, that's the red bars versus Washington State or the blue bars, you can see there are slight differences. And the differences are really because Seattle King County is a little more urban than, say, Washington State. So if we were looking at, say, on the east side of the mountains, you would see a little bit higher in the hunting and fishing and backpacking than, say, you would see in Seattle. Now, when they did the survey, they did it for 10 different regions. And they isolated Seattle King County as its own region and gathered the participation rates just for that area compared to the others. So you're in the Seattle King County region. Now, some of the highest bars here are for walking on a sidewalk or a trail, viewing wildlife or nature, hanging out, that's a popular term, picnicking, community gardens, and visiting nature historical exhibits. Now, some of the athletics you see are up in here, and their participation rates are relatively low because they're more age-based, they're more active, they're more child and, say, young adult-based. Versus some of the biggest ones down in here are most affected by older age groups or all ages in total. Next, please. Now, beside the participation rates, which we found most statistically relevant by age group, they also recorded how many times a year did you do these activities. And this they only did statewide. They didn't try to break these out by regions. So frequency means the number of times per year by participant. And you can see the same kind of bars emerge here from scooter riding down to walking on a roadway or a trail. And the greatest frequencies are in activities highest for walking or jogging on sidewalks or trails, windsurfing, wildlife viewing, and most athletic activities. So while maybe only 8% of the population will play, say, baseball, those kids will play a number of times per year. And so their volume is large, but their percent of participation is relatively small. Now, hold on for 1 minute. One other issue is we want to know where it occurred by type of park, not specific. It's not going to tell us that a Kenmore resident went to the state park to, say, play in the water. But what the question was, what kind of park? Was it a local park, a school, a state or a federal park, a tribal land, or some other place? So when we're projecting demand, for example, we're looking at athletics, we're looking at the percent that engaged in a local park or the school. When we're looking at boating, we're looking at local park and state and federal lands. And within Kenmore, you have local and state and federal. So that gives you a little bit, statewide at least, that gives you a little bit higher capture rate, if you want, of some of these demands. Next, please. So this is what the activity volume would be. And we get the recreational demand by multiplying the number of Kenmore residents in each of the age 6 of the 3 age groups by the participation rate, by the frequency rate, by the percent of core and city parks or schools or state parks. And now in 2025, those are the blue bars. In 2050, those are the red bars. And you can see down in here, walking on a trail or walking on a sidewalk, those red bars are proportionally much larger than the blue bars because you're aging. And that older age group does walking much more in a bigger volume than, say, some of the younger age groups who might be still in athletics. Now, the biggest volumes in Kenmore will be in wildlife, nature, and viewing, walking on trails or sidewalks, or hanging out through the unique age composition we expect you to have in 2050. Now, while we're using statistics, you have to keep in mind you're not an island. So some of your demands are going to flow outside the city, and some of the demands will be from non-city residents that flow into the city. The issue is to look at the proportions and the impacts, not only in recreation demand, but also in financing. So for example, I said that one of the highest percent rates was in walking on trails. Okay, if you're going to put a bond out, you're going to put out a trail on that bond to get the greatest interest by the greatest number of people. Some of the lowest participation rates are in athletics. So you wouldn't put a ball field in the bond referendum. That doesn't mean you're not going to do ball fields, but you're going to do it with a different source of funds and a different strategy, say, than you would do trails. So you can see, while this is kind of abstract on what the volume you're going to expect, it also flows into your financial decisions and your strategies. Next, please. Now, one of the other issues we're concerned with is what we call social equity. So within the city, there are different populations depending on what their income or their gender or their race or their housing status is, have equal access to parks as any other area within the city. So we use the same census material, but we also use census tracts. And one of the issues we looked at was housing stressed, meaning the percent that the household is paying over 30% if they have a mortgage or if they're paying rent. The red are areas with the highest, 34 to 33% are paying more than 30% of housing. That's high. Compared to the rest of the city, even though the rest of the city also has a significant proportion of housing stress, that area, the northwest area, has the highest percents of that. If we look at people of color, you can see that the highest scores, which are 46% non-white, if you want to put it that way, are just north of the highway. If we look at limited English, and that's 16.3% within the red areas, you can see it's concentrated somewhat with people of color and somewhat extended down the highway. If we look at people with physical disabilities, 21% within that red area, are persons with disabilities. Now, underlaying all that, you can see probably not in the brightest color where your parks are. So what we're looking at then is where are the gaps and are the facilities, the parks and programs in those areas compensating for the kinds of population that live there? Next, please. These are your parks. These are existing public parks within the city limits. Sure. You're asking, I'm going to try to paraphrase. You're asking what the color difference is in the parks that are underneath. When that's the first layer, and then we layer over the other characteristics. So sometimes the layers will start to distort what the color of the base is. I think what you can see here, you can see that's used to be Squires Landing, Squires Landing, Squires Landing, Squires Landing, in a slightly different tone, but nonetheless, what we're interested in, and you'll see much later, is where are the areas without parks in relation to these characteristics. Well, you're asking about the color code. These colors relate to whatever the percents that we were to break out. And above that, yeah, it does look gray rather than green. Yeah, we can fix that. Well, the colors get more intense as your social equity factor gets more significant. But I think that what you're asking is why don't the parks show more clearly? Now, keep in mind that, you know, this is a relative scale from 0 to whatever the highest score is. And so, for example, in housing stress, the percentages are pretty big. But when you get into poverty, they're pretty low, just in comparison. All right, next, please. So these are your existing public parks, if you want to call that. When you have 17, even though Bastier's athletics fields is not a public property, it's a leased property. And you can see the distribution now of where they are. And you can also see what the acreage is. And you have about 475.4 acres, the biggest being, of course, the state park. But the real question is the distribution. And the distribution not only against what we call social equity, but the ability to get to a park. Next, please. This is what we call a walkability map. And ideally, you should be able to walk 5 or 10 minutes from your house and be able to get to a park. The basic definition being a playground or something that the kids in the household can engage in. So you can see that the bright yellow are the 5-minute walkable areas, and kind of the orangish area are the 10-minute areas. But you can also see there's sections of the city where you can't walk to a park within that 5 to 10-minute zone. And so there's some along the top edge, and there's some within the kind of the central area, and there are a few kind of on the fringe. Now, when we did this walkability map at first, we only mapped your parks. But we also know that you have some parks that are right on the city limits, right on the edges. And so when we redo this map, we'll include those parks. Even though they're not yours, you still have the ability to walk to them. And we'll also include schools, which may give us a much better picture of your ability to get to some kind of recreational activity. And when we do that, I think you'll start to see that you can walk across city limits to a park. But I think you're also going to see that people outside your city can walk into your city to use those parks as well. But I think the real issue is gaps. And this gap, for example, exists. And part of that is when King County was in charge of development in the city, subdivisions were allowed to develop, and there weren't requirements to provide parks or set aside parks. So King County set aside big parks, but they did not set aside what we might call the neighborhood parks. And once these areas are developed, it's pretty difficult to go backwards and provide them. Do you have a question over here? No. One of the workshops we had was with North Shore School District. And so we talked about the design of schools. And
Would you mind repeating that question for the public?
are all schools accessible? And the answer was no. There are two design models that most schools have been developed with. One is called the California model, and the California model was an open campus. And the idea being that anybody within the neighborhood could walk in and use a playground, play on the field, do anything. It was very accessible. After some of the security issues we've had with schools, now you see a more closed school. So the buildings either frame and like the playgrounds are brought inside the building perimeter, fences go up and they're not as accessible as they quote used to be. That's probably going to stay that way. And so it means that even though there may be school facilities that are developed in the future, they may not be as accessible as your older school grounds are. You have older school grounds. They're the open model. So you can expect to walk into that school ground anywhere and be able to use facilities. However, North Shore School District is putting up more perimeter fencing so that after hours, you can't access those areas. And that's going to affect your ability to use them or to frequent them. Now, there's another issue in that design too, and that's can a police officer drive by and survey the campus? And in the California model, all those facilities were very easy to see. You could just drive by and see right into the campus. One of the disadvantages of the closed school model is where they're behind the buildings. It's not that easy to drive by and see what's going on. Sure. The question is, do the cities and the schools have agreements where you can jointly use the facilities? And the answer to that is yes or no. Some city and school districts, let's take Bellevue, where the school district and the city have the same boundaries more or less. They've been able to work out agreements where the city does share. And in fact, in some cases, the city built parks right adjacent to school grounds. So they have user agreements on school fields. And in Bellevue, at least, they even have user agreements about the indoor facilities. And in Bellevue, they also programmed and funded jointly some of those developments. So to upgrade some of the fields, there was partly city money and partly school district money. And then the city also said, we'll upgrade the gym so we can use them for more competitive play. North Shore has at least 5 cities within its boundaries, and then it's very difficult for them to come up with an agreement that they can apply equally to all those jurisdictions. So they've been reluctant to do that. But they also have another issue, and that's maintaining those facilities. In Bellevue, it's a joint agreement for maintenance, not just development. But you can see when you have multiple city jurisdictions within your boundaries, it gets a little bit more difficult. Now, all of your city, this area is all North Shore, but you have Lake Washington School District right down in here with an elementary and a high school, which are very close. In fact, one of the unique things when we look beyond your city limits is you have 3 high schools within basically a 10 to 15-minute walk of most of the city. Next, please. Another issue we're looking at is heat index. How hot does it get? And these are done by the Trust for Public Lands. And there are other agencies which are creating some of the heat index maps, but this is the most current that we can get. And this is based on 2019. The redder it gets, the hotter it gets. And the question is why? And you can see if it's along the highway, it's because you have a lot of pavement and you have a lot of buildings and you don't have many trees. But also, as we extend north up into the city, you can see there are areas in here which are residential, meaning when they were developed, they weren't developed with trees. Now, one of the issues in those heat indexes is it makes some of those areas inhabitable during the hot climate, even within the parks. And so one of the issues is how do we bring those temperatures down? And particularly if we're putting any kind of public spaces in, how do we bring those down? So you can see your city hall and hangar and even a little bit of kind of the, just south of the highway are heat islands, real heat islands. So one of our questions is how can we do that? Well, one of the things is trees, of course. The other is green roofs. Anything that would alter the sun's effect on the facilities. So in your case, even though we may not be building more parks within this area, we need to make it more habitable, whether you're on the street or whether you're going to some of the public facilities, whether even you're just trying to live within the neighborhood. Now, keep in mind, this was 2019. If we ran this heat index now, there'd be a lot more and a lot more intense on the red areas. Next, please. So are there any questions? And you see this guy brought his own, just to be prepared. So what would you like to know that we haven't covered tonight? And keep in mind, we've not gotten into the physical elements. We will by the time you see the next open house. Well, any questions from anybody in the room? Yes. So the question is it possible to do deals between cities and school districts in Kenmore? When I said the cities and school districts can't develop agreements, it doesn't mean that athletic leagues don't have agreements with the school district. So they have agreements to use the fields. And it varies by not only the school district, but in this case, some cases, even at individual schools. So the principal or the principal of the middle school or the elementary school is probably the one that's dealing with the leagues as to which fields get used and how long they get used. Now, one issue about what's allowed or not allowed is the school districts, what they use their money for, what they get from the state and even what they generate locally is subject to state controls, at least, over how they disperse that money between what they put in buildings to support education versus what they put in things that are recreation. However, a third party can build on school grounds using non-school money to augment whatever those facilities are. So I told you about Bellevue. Bellevue's put city money into upgrading the gyms, not school district money. And that was perfectly okay as far as the rules that govern how school districts use money. Now, as far as Kenmore, I think at this point in time, North Shore is not real eager to try to develop something that's unique to Kenmore without having to turn around and be in litigation with whatever other city or wherever any other athletic group wants. And what they're doing is trying to upgrade their existing facilities because they have a lot of older facilities. And so as they're doing that, they're looking at not only upgrading the buildings, but upgrading the recreational improvements as well, the playgrounds and the athletic fields and so on. Those are funded and programmed separately, buildings versus recreational improvements. So when they get into recreational improvements, there's an opportunity for the public to talk about what they're going to do. But at this point in time, the school district is not interested in entering into any binding agreement about how those facilities are used. And I think for two more reasons, we should probably cover. North Shore has raised their user fees that athletic groups pay. And primarily because North Shore looked at what it cost to maintain those facilities after league play and decided that they would rather have their staff set up, take down, and do the maintenance than have volunteer groups do that. And so therefore their fees are a little higher. And the bigger issue for the school district is maintenance and repair, not just who gets to use them. But as middle and high school athletics increase, the games and the schedules and so on, it's more and more difficult to have any available time on those fields and courts. So it's not like there's a bonanza of surplus space out there.
Can I pause real quick? We're going to use microphones so that Tom doesn't have to repeat questions.
I was just going to add on to that. The North Shore Soccer Program works with the North Shore School District, and getting a soccer team scheduled throughout an entire season on a field is quite complicated. And that's just the fields. There's the YMCA that uses the gyms for basketball. And there's probably other, it's been alluded to, there are clubs. So I think you'll find, I could be wrong, but I think you'll find that and North Shore Little League and all the baseball fields, the facilities are heavily used it's my understanding, they're heavily used and heavily occupied.
Yes, they are. Do you have anybody in chat that has a question?
Hey, sorry, just actually a quick follow-up. Todd, if you could bring up the presentation. I have two questions, one on slide 9 and one on slide 12. The one on slide 9 is what would be amazing, and I love this, to have an understanding of where the requirements are under stress. So for example, we see that there's for hanging out, as an example, there's a great increase between 2025 and 2050. I would be interested in knowing, okay, but do we have today the capacities to support the 2050 requirements or that need? Because if we do, then there's a great increase, but we don't have to do anything. But something, I don't know, lacrosse is very small compared to that. But if we have no lacrosse whatsoever, there's no support there. So understanding, and obviously not limited to Kenmore, but understanding in the area what we have to address each of those needs today and in tomorrow would be amazing. And another one in slide 12, we can see, for example, northeast of St. Edward State Park, there's a bit of a park desert. Would be great would be to have an overlay of the parks, but also this map, but where it's being built. Because if that area is fully built today, we don't have a capacity to build a neighborhood park. And so while it is an issue, it's not an issue we can easily address. Whereas if there is an opening, then this is something that as Planning Commission, I would imagine we'd like to maybe talk more about, of understanding if it's worth talking about it or not. Thanks.
When we do the citywide elements, we map out every kind of facility and see what its distribution is within the city. So playgrounds, for example, pickleball courts, trails, sports courts. And so it's not just, are there park deserts, but what's the distribution of some of those elements throughout the city? So in some cases, it's possible simply to diversify a park if there's capacity, to see, can we add a pickleball court without having a capacity issue? But there are also going to be some things you just are not going to have any more capacity for. That's going to be athletic fields. So the question then is, are you into real estate or are you into improvements? So in the old days, we built dedicated ball fields and dedicated soccer fields. We don't do that anymore. We build rectangular fields which have both those in it. We don't do grass anymore. We do turf and we do lights to increase the capacity of that field. But there'll be some, as you'll see later on, where you just don't have the capacity to increase much beyond what that is. And that means either you don't meet that demand or that demand is going to go wherever the available capacity is. Perfect example of that would be King County 60-acre park. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but it's over by Redmond. It's out in the farmlands, and it's just a big multi-purpose green space. And every league within King County, or even beyond King County, tries to do their soccer and their baseball and all their activities on that because there's not enough capacity within the cities to do that. Another way of increasing capacity, though, is limiting availability. So, for example, Mercer Island has a limited number of athletic fields, and their question not only was turf and lights, but how long do the teams practice and how long do the teams play? And how many hours of the day do you do that? And while it's inconvenient, are you going to play and practice on Sunday morning to increase that kind of capacity? So some of that can be done in management, and some of that has to be done by physical improvements. So we will be there by the time we get that piece of analysis done. Yeah. Chat question?
Yeah, we have a couple of online questions. The first one was, how does this apply to the open space plan?
I mean, the existing open space plan and the comp plan?
I think it's just the pros plan, or how does all this information apply to it? So,
One of the elements of the pros plan is habitat, conservation areas, and open space. And when we get to the citywide elements, that's where we'll be looking at that. So Swamp Creek, we'll be looking at whether or not that we can establish a bigger corridor. We'll also be looking at whether or not there's some areas along the Sammamish River can be increased. And those would be an integral part of that. Open space doesn't have to be big, though. It can be little pockets here and there. And so, yes, that is a key element of the pros plan.
okay, the next question is, how do we incorporate other park plans? For example, the Finn Hill Circle into the open space plan?
The graphic I showed you, did you back up? The graphic I showed you on this graphic is just parks within city limits. But we also have another graphic which has parks which were within walkable areas. Finn Hill is one. Can't remember the name of the sports fields that are up on the north end. But we've mapped all of them, and we've mapped all the schools. And we've also mapped some of the, what you might call private facilities. That includes Lakewood Schools Crew House. That also includes the golf course, even though it's open space, not considered a facility. So we will be looking, as we look at your citywide element, inside and outside the city, see what the true impact and potential is. Any more chats? Okay.
Is it me?
There you go.
Are you saying it's me? I think it's fine now.
There we go.
This question, it kind of piggybacks on some that we've heard from the community and from planning commissioners. I think in terms of understanding what our capacity is and what the gaps are and our needs analysis, it would be really nice to know what the specific requirements of the fields are, because I know they are different depending on the league. And like the littler kids play on a different size field than the Premier League kids. So I think having an understanding of those specifics will be really important so that we are not glossing over them and not understanding them. So that's just a comment. And
Well, let me answer that first. I said we can increase capacity by turf and lights and rectangular fields. We can also increase capacity if we don't build fields that are strictly age-based. We can move the pitcher mounts, we can move the baselines, we can move the outfields. So we need universal age fields if you get to that. Okay, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, that actually builds into my next question. Is there an opportunity to look at which spaces could be upgraded and what types of upgrades could increase capacity in some of these fields? Particularly, I think with like North Shore School District, you were mentioning they may need to modernize some of their fields in the coming years, and going in on those projects to try and make sure that they're open to the rest of the city while also helping them out in terms of modernizing and upgrading those fields. But also just elsewhere, places where we might have capacity for some other type of use on an existing facility that maybe isn't there today, whether that's a tennis court or pickleball field or whatever it may be. Just basically looking for areas of opportunity.
The chapter that has every single park on its own sheet, more or less. Most of your parks have been master planned already, so we have a really good feel of what was looked at for capacity and improvements. In some areas, we will revisit that, and we'll be taking a look at, can we make them universal or rectangular, or can we turf or light? Now, some of your parks have physical limitations. You may not be able to get the field bigger than what its physical can do. Some of your parks may have social issues. It may not be a practical thing to let kids play on a field after, say, 9 o'clock in a heavily residential area. So all those things we will look on a park by park basis, and then see what we add up once we've done all of that, and see what gaps remain after that.
In regards to the, in regards to working with North Shore School District, just a couple of things. First of all, any of the Kenmore citizens have a very active opportunity to engage with North Shore School District around their bond and levy processes and priority setting processes, which always consider athletics as one of the list of 20, 40, 60 items up for consideration, which then get culled down into a short list for the eventual bond and levy. So just a note that Kenmore citizens certainly have an opportunity to participate in that process, which is very transparent and represented on the North Shore School District site. Secondly, the North Shore School District facilities have historically been managed centrally, with literally one individual being the key contact for all things. Not that building administrators don't maybe have to sign off on things or make it assured that it goes into a master plan with what's going on campus, but there has always been a central person organizing that, unless that has changed dramatically. Third thing, I guess, when we look at to the point of the Planning Commission or the council looking to partner with North Shore School District, where are we, either with the Planning Commission or the council, in syncing up on their levies? Because I know they, for example, right now are prepping for their next levy. And so the idea that we would want to partner, I'm not sure that the levy cycles are how in sync or completely out of sync they are, but their remodels of their schools are very different, for example, than like Washington School District, which tends to take an existing old building, build the new building on the existing playground, then flip and reconstruct the field where the building had been. North Shore is much more, and has been for decades, restoring and maintaining older buildings. But their more current approach to their playgrounds has been installing turf even at the elementary level, and also converting them to accessible playgrounds. So taking down high climbing structures and those kinds of things. So I think that one of the things to have on the docket in terms of consideration is, in a new era of what we think of as a playground, what do climbing opportunities look like? What do non-climbing and accessible opportunities look like? And how are those spread throughout the city and the region, so that all park users have opportunities to kind of scratch their itch wherever, whichever thing they like to do and
Sure.
have that distributed. Certainly, it looks like more of the school playgrounds are going to be appealing to one constituent group, but there may be constituent groups that are interested in much more active or risky play. And how does a municipal entity provide for that? Because I would hate to see those wiped out. Skate parks, climbing structures, whatever, do have their place in childhood.
Sure. The funding levies or bonds don't have to occur at the same time. The construction is what has to occur at the same time. So if you had a bond one year, a school bond, and then the money was allocated for improvements, you can have a city levy come along and supplement that as long as it didn't happen at the same construction time. Now, one other feature to keep in mind about the schools that are in Kenmore, they're smaller properties. They're older schools. So it's really restricted just not only what they can do on those sites, but how easy it is to try to say build next to and then tear down and redo. And the school district does not own vacant properties within Kenmore. Now, Shoreline School District in Shoreline, or at least the school district in Shoreline, has vacant properties and have purposely done that so that they can build new in the vacant properties and then tear down, say, some of the older facilities. That's probably not going to be easy to do in Kenmore. Now, one other feature about doing joint improvements with the school districts, middle and high school facilities, yes, you can take those to competitive play and you can develop those fields and so on with the highest capacity that you can. The biggest challenge is not the games, it's the practices. The practices don't have to occur on competitive fields. And in fact, it's easy to, if there's room, to upgrade the fields in the elementary schools for practices at much cheaper and much greater number and capacity than it is to try to make competitive fields do everything. The issue is safety, not necessarily the standard. So if you're going to an elementary school and you take what is basically their green area and you're going to make it safe to do practice sessions on for all ages, then you're going to have to put some effort in getting the ground prepared, getting the irrigation done, even if you're not building out a facility. Now, there was one school district that went too far. That was Lake Oswego. The Little League got permission from the school district to go into the elementary schools and do their fields. So they made them all Little League compatible. You know, they put up fences and lights and everything else. And so when the kids came out at recess, there wasn't something they could go throw a ball around or run around and do anything else. You have to be somewhat careful not to go too far. Other questions? Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I guess a comment before a question. I've got questions as well. I think we've had some difficulty where we tried to partner with the school district before, specific to a boathouse and some rowing. Debbie could probably give more context there than I could, but I think that is an example of where that could be difficult across the municipalities. Though I think it's obviously something we need to consider still in terms of what our community can access. It might be more difficult for us to have a formal agreement in some cases. Question I was going to ask is about the Lake Point, because that could be a potential new park. Are we going to consider that within the pros plan?
One of the challenges of densifying, particularly your urban core, where you're building up to 4 and 5 stories and that's basically housing as urban parks. You need a leisure place, a respite, an open space within the densest part of the city. And most of the past parks development has been on developing suburban parks, big open areas, in some cases with ball fields and so on. We need to program in your update the plazas, the squares, the areas where you can go and duck in and just take a little breather if you want, within your most dense areas that are developing. Now, most private developers are pretty savvy. You can see when they advertise their buildings, they say, we have a rooftop dog park, we have a picnic area, we have a barbecue grill, we may have a meeting room or whatever. but it's limited to the residents of the building. So somewhere we have to consider where the appropriate line is where some things become public that are shared within the building or the property, and then what things remain resident only.
That's a good point because Pulte Group has just built a park as part of their development there. I can't recall, Todd and Debbie probably know, is that meant to be open to the public? Was that part? Yeah, so it is, yeah. So I'd be interested because the point you made around our growth is going to be in our core, whether we can write that kind of thing into the pros plan is that we're going to try and encourage private developers that are coming in to add community benefit in what they're building. So it's not just for residents, there's a broader use cases. One tactical thing, very tactical, you probably catch this anyway, but the walkability slide, I think that was one forward. The big green one on the right-hand side there, I don't think that's a park. I think that's a farm. But you'd probably catch that because the one further up is Doug Allen, but further down, I think that big green space there is just farmland. But we can confirm that. Yeah.
This should be up here.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's Bothell High School. Well, actually, Bothell High School is right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, I'll have to talk to our GIS person.
Always.
To correct that. So if you look at the map I showed you of city parks, that's more accurate. And when next time we meet, I show you the parks that are outside your boundaries, you'll see the correct locations. Now, back to your point though, for one thing to make, you impose an impact fee with the idea being that new development will allocate a certain amount of what that cost would be, and then the city would go and develop the facilities. One of the issues with impact fees, particularly in your developing core, is that the development is built. So you have the money, but you don't have the opportunity to design with, let's say, the developer or figure out how the best way of doing that. Now, when they go to pay the impact fee, you have to decide whether they get credit for anything they might provide. Well, technically, if they limit their recreational components to residents only, they don't qualify for a discount on their impact fee. But the real question is more physical, the design of things, not just the allocation of money. Okay, any other questions?
So I think the example of the Pulte property up at 180, just south of 185th, is a great example because from a community standpoint, it has been transformational to see what has happened just in terms of use of that property. People in the surrounding apartments are using it. Children from the trailer home communities are using it. It is a transit route from children from the trailer home community who take the bus up at the Water District up at 185th, and a safe passable. It's the ultimate of the walkways and waterways success, giving those children a very safe passageway and an opportunity for physical activity on the way to school and on the way back from school. So it's, and arguably, it softens the impact of what will be 5 condo buildings there ultimately when they are fully built out. And so I would actually propose that the city and planning commission talk with and get some kind of statement for PR purposes and the like for future developers about the relative goodwill that that has engendered for their property. Because I think most of us, or I would think that many of us, most of us in the community feel very good about that space. Most people, I think, probably think of it as a city park. I actually think they deserve a little more credit for the fact that they've developed quite an attractive multi-age, multi-function space. that is good for 3-year-olds, but it's also great for 13-year-olds and 93-year-olds. So, yeah, I think that just really also the intentional messaging about those successful partnerships and what did the builder give and what did the city give? How did that work? It'd be a great item to include in the quarterly Kenmore newsletter or something for the community to understand more fully.
Sure. That raises another question too. Impact fees and development standards have usually been presumed to be just residentially oriented. And so there's no reason you can't have an impact fee and design standards for commercial development, particularly the roofs of commercial developments. So in Seattle, on one of the historic parking garages are tennis courts. And on top of another parking garage is their biggest community farmers' gardens. So the point being, if we want to green the roofs to control heat, then we should also be looking at those kinds of solutions to increase recreational capacity. But we shouldn't exclude commercial from having to have the same kind of obligation and role as residential development.
Kind of got a multi-parter here. So one thing I am curious about is open spaces and kind of just wildlife management, walking around natural open spaces and how connected they are, having connected like riparian areas. I'd be curious to see almost like a watershed map of the riparian areas. Are there any clear things that block wildlife crossings and that we could address to enhance the green space and wildlife access we have in Kenmore? I saw a bobcat the other day, which I had no clue there were bobcats in this area. And then I looked it up and sure enough, there's bobcats. And I would love to see more connectivity. And I know we've been doing a lot of work with culverts and things like that for fish passage. And I know that doubles for other types of wildlife as well, because they've got.
You've done a pretty good job between Wallace and Swamp Creek properties, and you've been expanding them over the last couple of years. The question is, can we create a greenway where it basically becomes a connector of those areas throughout as much of the city as we can? Now, the presumption is so far you've been buying them, but you can also put conservation easements on. You can buy out the development rights, even though these areas are critical and probably can't, in most cases, be developed anyway. So the point is, there are other tools to get to the point where we want to create that greenway belt that extends from the waterfront all the way up as far as we can on Swamp Creek.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess my question there is, do we have a map, I guess, of things that limit the walk shed, or not walk shed, I guess wildlife shed, for lack of a better word. Like in this map here, we can kind of see these yellow spikes by 61st off on the left-hand side above 522. And my assumption looking at that map is that's the walk shed to cross 522 to get to the Burke-Gilman Trail and Log Boom Park at that location. And if you're a bobcat, you can't cross 522. So it'd be really difficult to go, east to west, for instance.
One of the objectives of the trail plan is to figure out how to get across that.
I actually have a comment from
Places.
online that says that EERC did a study a number of years ago about wildlife
Oh,
connectivity.
perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just look into that then.
Yeah.
Well, that answers that question. And then the other question I had is walkability and connectivity. Never mind. I'm going to have to think about how I phrase this one a bit first. Hopefully someone else has a question.
These walkability maps use GIS and they trace sidewalks, trails, roads, and so on that exist. Now, for example, when we did this in Shoreline, we saw one of their parks that had an ellipse that just went south and there was nothing on the north, east, or west. And that's because it only had one entrance to get into the park. So you see, there are things we can do to alter the walkability without getting into major construction, just how it's configured. Now, that was an older park and it had one entrance for security reasons. But in so doing, you see it became inaccessible to the rest of the neighborhood.
I think that was the direction I'm going. Basically making sure that we have comfortable, accessible walkways on new construction. You can have plenty of parks, but if you have a really large super block that you have to walk half a mile to get around it, and the park's only 400 feet from your house,
Right.
you're going to get a lot less utilization. And so thinking about how we plan for that, I've seen one new development where it appears that we're going to have a walkway, but it's going to be around the building and there's going to be a very large parking lot in front. And so what appears to be the natural pathway currently and the desire line currently from Google Maps is going to be wiped out, and you're going to make people walk further so that we can put a parking lot in the way. And I know that's a hard one and it's tricky and it depends on sites, but thinking about how to encourage connectivity so we have better access to parks is something I'm kind of curious about. It's not really a question, more of just a statement at this point. So I'm going to stop talking.
Okay. We back up to that one.
So there is another comment too online that Finn Hill Alliance has a plan for a Finn Hill walkable circle from Juanita Bay, St. Ed's to Wayne and Golf Course and back. Is that kind of what you're talking about, Chris?
Yeah, and that's another issue. One of the workshops we had was with every jurisdiction around you. But when we get to the point we're looking at plan proposals, we want to sit down with those jurisdictions again and make sure we're linking your potentials with their potentials. So, Finn Hill is just right here and it goes all the way down. It's got an extensive trail system. You want to connect to that. I think some of the major things we see is not just these gaps in here, but the idea of the habitat corridor. Also, we're looking at how can we provide access over across the highway? How can we link it even further along the waterfront? One of the facilities also that we find that you have a major need and interest in is a combined arts, drama, theater, music facility. And the question is, where's an appropriate place to anchor that? And do you want to anchor everything on this side, or do you want to anchor some things on the south side? Now, one thing to keep in mind about the plan, it is a 6 and 20-year plan. You have to have 6 years not only identifying what you're going to do with financing, but your 20 years, your vision. And you don't want to be too short-sighted in the vision, because whatever's in that plan is what any other project that comes along in the interim has to address. So if you're too timid in laying out trails, you're not going to get the trail when the time comes. If you're too timid in laying out where your riparian corridor should be, you're not going to get that opportunity when the time comes. So we're balancing off a short range with the big picture vision for 20 years at least. And you want to make sure that vision is coherent, but also begins to define where you're going to go.
I have a comment related to Chris's comment about riparian corridors, and this is mostly for the benefit of the online people who are listening and those here who are interested in WDFW. I know has this as a value and priority, and the stakeholder interviews that we got to read that Tom, you did with them, they did talk about this concept. So there would be a good resource for community members to look to on this idea. And then the separate comment is that on accessibility, not just in terms of how accessible it is in terms of walking, but how accessible the grades are into our parks, I feel is something that we should look at. There are parks now that I think are inaccessible because of things like that. So taking a look at those and fixing them as we can feels important to me. And Wallace is a good example of this, both the entrance at the parking lot on 73rd and the entrance on 68th, the slopes are pretty steep. So that makes the whole park harder to access than it should be.
Okay. Anything else for tonight?
We have a couple more online. There is a comment, do you think there's an opportunity for more neighborhood parks or pocket parks?
Yes. Especially in the areas we said are unwalkable or don't have walk zones, yes. But some of those may be relatively small, and that would be more like what you call a mini park or a pocket park, yes.
And then the other comment was Lake Point presents a central opportunity for connectivity, riparian, wildlife, walkability, and arts, music, etc.
Okay. Uh,
Okay. Tom, I had a couple questions. Bear with me. When we're partnering with local jurisdictions, I know we've talked a lot about Finn Hill and kind of surrounding areas. Are we also thinking we might want to reach out to City of Bothell? Because we have that whole back nine that seems, I don't know if they've had any interest in the past. It feels like they're fuzzy on that. But is that a target of ours?
Yes, as I said, one of the workshops we had was with all the jurisdictions. And their comments are in the draft plan document so far. But I think the issue is they're all in different cycles of updating their plan. They're not all doing it this year. So once we get to the point where we have physical ideas, we want to sit down again and say, all right, can we connect the trail here? Or what are you doing on the sports fields next to the city and so on and so on and so on. So yes, definitely.
Okay. And then the last pros plan, I just read through the 2019. There were 5 things that kind of seemed to crop up as increased demand. If we see those same kind of 5 things pop up in the survey now at the same time, is that a signal that we should be focusing more?
Sure. You want to incorporate what was described as the vision in the past. You want to recognize it, but you don't want to be tied to it if things have changed. And things have really changed in the last 6 years as far as your development pattern and the downtown area and so on. So it's not like we throw everything out and we start, from scratch. So we want to blend what happened, what was identified before with what we think the new challenges are. You mean the San Juan County? No, I was not part of that. Not that I didn't want to be.
There's another comment or question. Is Lake Point in the open space plan? Or is there a plan for Lake Point in the open space plan?
Yes, there'll be an element in the pros plan strictly on habitat and open space. And for your biggest partners there will be Fish and Wildlife. So you see your different partners you can deal with. And if you're looking at your trails, your partner is going to be washed out for sure. And washed out is a lot more recreational oriented than they were 5 or 6 years ago. The Complete Streets program is very definitely that. Okay. It's a good point.
Just before, Mike's mic wasn't on, so can you just paraphrase that was an age-related question?
I think that as the population ages and given our climate, we need indoor facilities as well as outdoor facilities. And one of the things the SCORP Diary survey focused on primarily were outdoor spaces. There are some activities that they did track that have some indoor potentials, but not to the extent that I think that we need to account for. Now, there's a variety of ways of doing the indoor facilities, and one of the age implications is parks is leisure. Leisure is anything that's not work. Depending on where you work, there's leisure even in the work. So there's not limits on what we should be looking at. So we want to look at art, we want to look at drama, at theater, at music. We want to look at indoor activities as well. And as far as the age impact, a lot of the gyms are being recycled for more pickleball courts than they are for basketball, and that reflects the differences in ages. But also it can be found space. The biggest community center in Portland is a vacant big box store. And it's just a big open space, and they reuse it and reprogram it for whatever it is that they want to do. And Issaquah has a space that's like that too. So one week it may be pickleball courts, and the next week it may be tennis, and the next week it may be basketball. So those kinds of opportunities I think are important. Puyallup is doing that, but with a nonprofit partner. And the nonprofit partner wanted more tennis capability, so they're adding on to their recreation center, but that's a multi-purpose space available to the public. So when we go there, we don't have to presume it's all public. I think Seattle just built their first indoor pickleball facility, and so there's a partnership. One thing you'll find in the parks business, it's the most entrepreneurial activity you can do. It blends public and nonprofit and private business. That's about what it means. So our approach has to be recognizing that. Anything else on chat?
Just one more comment, swimming pool at St. Ed's.
The swimming pool at St. Edwards, it doesn't meet code. It's not of this size. It's a forward thrust. They're not going to rehabilitate it or use it again. There have been 2 regional aquatic studies done. One involved Lake Forest Park, Shoreline. Did it involve you too? And then another one involved Kirkland and Bothell. Both of them looked at regional facilities because that's what it's going to take to make that financially feasible. None of the city's population is big enough to sustain it. It's not the construction, it's the maintenance and operation costs. In order to pull either one of those off, they would need to create a separate taxing authority that could combine jurisdictions, which to do that, that's really difficult. If you don't do a taxing authority, then you have to have agreements between the participating cities. And those have been notoriously insolvent. I mean, it's hard to get a 30-year intercity agreement in that form. So right now, as far as I know, there's nobody pursuing the regional approach to the pools. Now, some school districts have developed pools. Kitsap has a pool at their high school because they have a swim team. And their idea then is the kids are learning to swim, which was the whole justification for the forward thrust to begin with. But most school districts don't want to go there because they're expensive. They don't get the utilization that they want. There have been some pools developed by nonprofit groups. In the Portland area, it's the swim teams that are the ones that are building the facilities. And in the YMCA builds facilities, but both of those are designed for their user base. So if you go into a swim team pool, it's all lap lanes and diving boards. If you go into the YMCA, it's all, family swim. So do I see, unless one of those regional approaches materializes, you don't have a population big enough to sustain a pool. And that's just kind of a hard fact. With that cheery note, are we done for tonight? Okay.
So I just wanted to thank everybody who's here in attendance and online for all the questions and comments. And also, if you're not aware, we do have a online survey that has been up for a while. It's still available to be taken. That's on, if you Google Kenmore Pros Plan, I think you can get to that page, or if you just go to the city's web page and find the survey, it's on the Speak Up Kenmore page. And then, as Tom mentioned, there's going to be another survey sent out to property owners and residents. That'll come later this summer, early fall. And then we'll continue this dialogue with the Planning Commission throughout the summer. And we're anticipating to have drafts of the pros plan and the pros element probably in the next 6 to 8 weeks or so. But it'll be ongoing discussions with the Planning Commission. And then eventually the Planning Commission will be making recommendations, their recommendation of approval to the City Council later this fall. And then finally for adoption by the end of this year. And then there's a small portion of that, which is the impact fees that'll just roll over into the first quarter of 2026. But if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself. Again, my name is Todd Hall, or Debbie Bent, Community Development Director. We're happy to take any questions via email, phone, and then encourage you just to continue participation online or at Planning Commission. So, sure. We'll be able to put those up on our webpage if they haven't been already, but we'll definitely get those uploaded for tomorrow. Yeah.
They're actually part of the agenda packet.
Are they?
For the,
Okay.
yeah. So
Okay,
they're available online right now. Mhm.
Yeah. And then do we need Tracy to adjourn, I believe? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming tonight. And as Todd said, please reach out to him, take the survey. You can email us as planning commissioners. And with that, the special meeting of the Kenmore Planning Commission is adjourned at 7:58. Thank you.